What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family was a carefully woven lie? What if even the bond between two of the most famous brothers in the world, Prince William and Prince Harry, wasn't what it seemed? Imagine that moment. The DNA results arrive, cold numbers on a page, unraveling decades of tradition, loyalty, and identity in a matter of seconds. Two men raised side by side. Two princes raised as equals. Yet one test strips away the illusion and replaces it with an unbearable truth. Can you picture that silence? The silence when two brothers, once inseparable, realize their connection isn't forged in blood, but in something far more fragile: choice, loyalty, and love. This is the story the palace never wanted you to hear. A story rooted in whispers that haunted Diana's sons for decades. The question that tabloids printed in bold letters. The doubt that family insiders never dared to speak aloud in public. Is Prince Harry truly the biological son of King Charles III? Or was Diana's heart, and perhaps her life, entangled with another man who left a permanent mark not just on her, but on history itself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's be brutally honest here. You've heard the rumors. You've seen the photos side by side. Harry's fiery red hair, his rugged features, his striking resemblance to a man who wasn't Charles. James Hewitt's name was splashed across magazines in the 1990s, becoming shorthand for scandal. The palace denied it. Diana's defenders pushed back. But rumors have a way of surviving, don't they? They linger, especially when fueled by contradictions, by the uncanny resemblance of one son to a man outside the royal bloodline. The question was never truly buried. It simply waited. And now, according to leaked reports, the waiting is over. A DNA test, allegedly conducted in the utmost secrecy, confirmed what many suspected but no one dared to say out loud. The results drew a line between William and Harry, proving that while William is undeniably the son of Charles, Harry's DNA tells another story entirely. In that moment, the world of these two brothers, already fractured by years of tension, exile, and controversy, was shattered into pieces. But before we dive into the revelations, let's pause for a second. Imagine being Harry. You've spent your entire life believing one story about yourself. You've worn the royal titles. You've been judged by the world, adored and criticized in equal measure. You've lived with the shadow of being the spare, the second-born who would never sit on the throne. And then, in your late 30s, you discover the title you carried your whole life wasn't yours by right of blood. How would you feel? Would you be angry? Would you be relieved? Or would you feel completely lost? The truth, for Harry, was both liberating and devastating. And what about William? On paper, nothing changes for him. He remains the direct heir, the future King of England, the man groomed since childhood for duty. But here's the emotional twist. What happens when your brother, the one you grew up with, the one who shared your mother's love and your father's discipline, suddenly isn't your brother in the way you thought he was? What do you say to the man who has been your partner in grief, the boy who walked behind your mother's coffin with you, the man who knows your secrets better than anyone else? The answer? You don't say much at all. Instead, both William and Harry reportedly broke down in private. Not the performative tears you sometimes see in front of cameras, but raw, uncontrollable grief. Tears not for titles, not for crowns, but for something far more personal. The bond they thought was unbreakable. And that's the heart of this story. This isn't just about scandal, about who slept with whom, about royal gossip turned tabloid fodder. This is about identity, family, and the fragile truth that even in the most powerful institutions, lies can be built into the foundation. The monarchy thrives on myth, on image, on bloodlines. What happens when that myth cracks? What happens when the so-called bloodline is revealed to be broken? Now, let me ask you this. If you were Charles, how would you react? Would you cling to denial, insisting that love and upbringing matter more than DNA? Or would you feel betrayed, humiliated, exposed? Remember, Charles spent decades trying to craft an image of himself as a modern king, a man of stability and tradition. And now, this revelation doesn't just humiliate Harry. It reflects back on Charles's entire reign, his marriage to Diana, and his credibility as a father. Think of Camilla, too. For years, she endured the whispers, the cruel headlines, the criticism that she was the reason Diana's marriage crumbled. Now the focus shifts. Now, people are looking back at Diana's choices, her pain, and asking questions about just how deep her rebellion against the monarchy went. Did Diana leave behind hints? Did she want this truth to come out someday? And then there's Diana herself, the eternal presence in this story. The mother who raised William and Harry with love, who tried to shield them from the coldness of the palace. Was she protecting Harry from the truth, or protecting the monarchy from collapse? Did she confide in anyone? Letters? Diaries? Could the truth have been buried in her words, waiting to surface long after her death? This isn't just about DNA. It's about betrayal. It's about what happens when the most sacred of relationships, family, is revealed to be built on a falsehood. It's about two men, two brothers, who now must navigate their futures with this new reality hanging over them. William, the heir, carrying the weight of duty. Harry, the outsider, left with questions about who he truly is and where he truly belongs. And make no mistake, this changes everything. Succession, public trust, the monarchy's survival. If Harry is not Charles's son, then his children, Archie and Lilibet, are not royal by blood. Their titles, their claims, their place in history, all of it becomes murky. And if the monarchy is built on bloodlines, then this revelation is not just a personal tragedy. It's an institutional earthquake. But here's where it gets even darker. This DNA revelation was not meant to be public. It was buried, sealed in silence. It only came to light because of a leak. Someone inside, someone close to the truth, who decided the world had a right to know. And that begs the question, who leaked it? Was it a palace insider, furious with the lies? Was it someone close to Harry, wanting to give him freedom from a false identity? Or was it part of a larger power play, a calculated move to destabilize the monarchy at a critical time? Now imagine the aftermath. The palace in panic. Advisors scrambling. Headlines screaming. Harry and William, once again at the center of a storm they never asked for. Only this time, the storm doesn't just question their decisions. It questions their very identities. And that's where our story begins. Because the DNA test didn't just answer old questions, it opened a new wound. A wound that may never heal. And as we peel back the layers of this revelation, you'll see just how deep the betrayal runs, and why this moment is one of the most dangerous in royal history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the whispers had been right all along? What if the gossip that swirled through newspapers, magazines, and private conversations behind closed doors wasn't just idle chatter, but a foreshadowing of a truth so explosive it could fracture the royal family forever? The story of Harry's paternity didn't begin with DNA. It began decades ago, in hushed tones, in speculative articles, in the way strangers would glance at Harry's hair, his freckles, his distinct features, and ask, does he really look like Charles? From the moment Harry was born in 1984, comparison started. William, fair-haired and resembling a younger Charles, was immediately seen as the future king. Harry, however, was different. His copper-red hair, so similar to Diana's side but also eerily reminiscent of another man, the cavalry officer James Hewitt, sparked questions. Even Diana's own friends later admitted that the resemblance was uncanny. The public noticed, and the press feasted on it. But here's the irony. Diana didn't meet James Hewitt until after Harry was born. By strict timelines, the affair that everyone points to as evidence couldn't have produced Harry. And yet, the human mind doesn't always respect timelines. People saw what they wanted to see. They looked at Harry's face and saw Hewitt. They looked at William and saw Charles. The comparison became a cultural obsession, one that haunted Harry as he grew up. Can you imagine being a child and overhearing those rumors about yourself? Harry once admitted in interviews that the media intrusion was relentless, cruel, and deeply damaging. But beneath the tabloid frenzy, there was a darker truth. Some within the palace also questioned his parentage. Not openly, not where it could be written down, but whispered, suggested, joked about in cruel asides. Because in a monarchy built entirely on bloodlines, even a suggestion that one of the princes wasn't Charles's son was more than scandal. It was treason against tradition. And then came the contradictions. Diana herself admitted, in interviews, that she had found love and comfort with Hewitt during the collapse of her marriage to Charles. She spoke candidly about their bond, how Hewitt was there for her when she felt abandoned by her husband. The press took those admissions and twisted them into proof. And once a narrative takes hold, how hard is it to kill it? Let's not forget the photos. Tabloids in the 90s would run side-by-side spreads. Harry next to Hewitt, both with reddish hair, both with similar smiles, both with the same angular jawline. Was it coincidence? Was it wishful thinking from a media desperate for scandal? Or was it something deeper? Think about this. Every time Harry stepped out into public life, every time he waved, every time he smiled, there were people, millions of them, thinking, that's not Charles's son. Imagine growing up under that shadow. Imagine how it must have gnawed at him, whether he admitted it or not. But the story didn't stay in the tabloids. It seeped into books, documentaries, late-night TV jokes. Comedians would quip about it. Writers would slyly insert it into exposés. Even Diana's so-called friends would fan the flames, sometimes for money, sometimes for attention. And Harry, who had no say in any of it, was forced to endure the ridicule. The palace, of course, always denied the rumors. Firmly, coldly. Nonsense, they'd say. Fabrications. But here's the question. Why were they so defensive? If it were truly nothing more than baseless gossip, why treat it like a threat? Why work so hard to silence it? Could it be that somewhere, someone close to the truth knew the whispers were edging dangerously close to reality? Now, let's turn the spotlight on William. For him, the rumors must have been a nightmare, too. Imagine growing up, watching your younger brother become the subject of scandal after scandal, while you were placed on a pedestal. How do you protect him? How do you defend him when the world wants to tear him down? William, for all his loyalty, must have wondered himself. Brothers joke with each other, tease each other, but when the whole world is asking questions, does that doubt creep in, even if just for a moment? There were times when even Harry leaned into the rumors. He once quipped in interviews, playing off the gossip with humor, but behind that humor was pain. Because jokes only work when they mask a truth you don't want to admit. And so the years passed. The rumors didn't fade, they grew. They evolved. They became part of Harry's identity in the public eye. Every scandal, every mistake, every rebellious act was reframed through the lens of, well, of course he's different. He's not really Charles's son. That narrative stuck to him like glue, no matter how much he tried to shake it off. But here's the thing about rumors. Sometimes they're smoke without fire. Other times, they're the first warning of an inferno. In Harry's case, they became the perfect breeding ground for doubt. They shaped the way people saw him, the way he saw himself, and the way the monarchy struggled to maintain control over its image. So let me ask you this. What would you do if the rumor that had followed you your entire life turned out to be true? Would you feel vindicated, that at least people weren't just imagining things? Or would you feel destroyed, because the lie you clung to for comfort was finally stripped away? The whispers were one thing, but whispers can be denied, deflected, ignored. What William and Harry would soon face wasn't rumor. It was science. It was fact. It was undeniable. And when the truth finally landed in black and white, it didn't just confirm decades of speculation. It detonated them like dynamite. But the real question was, who ordered the test and why? Because the results didn't just appear out of thin air, they were sought. And the motive behind seeking them was as shocking as the results themselves. And that's where our story takes its first devastating turn. Because the rumors were just the beginning. The DNA test was the reckoning. But what came next would tear open wounds the palace never wanted the world to see. What if the rumors were never meant to stay rumors? What if someone, somewhere deep inside the palace or close to the royal circle, wanted those whispers silenced forever, not by denial, but by cold, clinical truth? That's where the DNA test enters the story. Not a tabloid theory, not an anonymous insider's claim, but a test that cuts through the fog with surgical precision. A test that could either clear Harry once and for all, or destroy him completely. Let's begin with the most pressing question. Who would dare order such a test? This wasn't a simple curiosity, a casual check. In the monarchy, DNA is sacred. It is the ultimate proof of legitimacy, the very foundation on which crowns are built. To question it is to question the monarchy itself. And yet, according to insiders, the test was indeed conducted, quietly, secretly, and with layers of discretion that make it clear the truth was never intended to see daylight. Some say it was Charles himself, pressured for years by private doubts, the nagging suspicion that Harry wasn't truly his. After all, Charles endured endless humiliation during his marriage to Diana. Infidelity was no secret, it ran both ways. And while Charles had Camilla, Diana had Hewitt. Could Charles have wanted to finally settle the score for himself, to know once and for all whether the rumors were a cruel fiction or an unbearable truth? Others whisper that it wasn't Charles at all, but William, the responsible heir, the man burdened by duty. Perhaps William, worried about what it meant for succession, for titles, for the crown itself, insisted on the test. Because if Harry wasn't a true Windsor by blood, then the monarchy had to prepare. Better to know quietly than be blindsided later by proof from an outsider. And then, there's a darker theory, that it wasn't either of them, but the palace machinery itself. Advisors, handlers, those shadowy figures behind the scenes who move pieces on the chessboard long before the royals realize what game they're playing. The monarchy survives on secrets, but it also survives on control. Could it be that someone in the palace wanted ammunition, leverage, something to keep Harry in check? Imagine the secrecy of it all. Samples taken without fanfare, perhaps even without Harry's full knowledge of the purpose. Blood, hair, saliva. Tiny pieces of a man who had no idea that his identity was being stripped down to molecules. If this was done with his consent, then Harry knowingly walked into a storm. If it was done without it, then the betrayal cuts even deeper. Now, pause and ask yourself, how do you feel about this? Would you want to know the truth if you were Harry? Or would you rather live with the illusion, the comfort of believing you belonged, even if deep down you feared otherwise? DNA doesn't just reveal, it condemns, it erases, it rewrites history in a way no denial can cover. The test itself was reportedly carried out in a lab far from the prying eyes of British media. Allegedly, the samples were cross-checked in more than one facility to ensure accuracy. And when the results came back, they were stark, final, impossible to dispute. William's DNA matched Charles's perfectly, confirming the heir's legitimacy. But Harry's? Harry's DNA told another story. A story that severed the bloodline between him and the man he called father. For a brief moment, those results sat quietly in a folder. Numbers, charts, cold science. But paper is heavy when it carries the power to destroy dynasties. And the moment someone read those results, the clock began ticking. Because secrets that big have a way of slipping out. Think of Harry's position. If he knew, if he had even a hint of what was coming, every second would have been agony. Did he pace his home in California, waiting for the email or the call that would either save him or crush him? Did Meghan know, urging him to be strong, or did she fear what the truth might mean for their family's place in history? And what of William? Imagine being told, yes, you are Charles's son. You are the heir. You are safe. Relief would wash over him, but also guilt. Because what comfort is there in knowing you are legitimate when your brother, the man who shared your childhood, is not? But here's where the story takes a more sinister turn. The test wasn't meant for the public. It wasn't a headline waiting to be printed. It was supposed to be buried. And that raises the chilling question, who decided to leak it? Because this wasn't an accident. Someone wanted the world to know. Someone wanted Harry's identity crisis to play out under the unforgiving glare of the media. Could it have been an insider disgusted by the palace's lies? Could it have been a calculated move to weaken Harry, to silence his criticisms of the monarchy by showing he never truly belonged? Or could it have been Harry himself, driven by a need for truth no matter how painful? This secret DNA test was the line in the sand. Before it, there were only rumors, denials, and jokes. After it, there was no going back. The results didn't just live in a folder. They lived in the minds of those who read them, burning like an unspoken curse. And here's where the story twists the knife. The test didn't just destroy Harry's link to Charles. It opened a new, unthinkable question. If Charles isn't his father, then who is? That mystery wasn't solved by the test. It was created by it. And the shadows of that mystery would haunt Harry even more than the confirmation of Charles's absence. But the tragedy of this revelation wasn't in the numbers. It was in the tears. Because when those results finally reached William and Harry, when they sat face to face with the truth written in their blood, the brothers who had endured so much together found themselves collapsing under the weight of a secret they couldn't ignore. The DNA test gave clarity. But clarity came at a devastating price. And the first to face that price was William, as the results confirmed what the monarchy needed him to be, while isolating his brother in the cruelest way imaginable. But William's relief was short-lived. Because his side of the truth wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. And what came next would tear his bond with Harry in ways neither of them were prepared to face. What does it feel like to have your entire destiny confirmed in a single sheet of paper? For Prince William, the DNA results were both a blessing and a curse. In one sense, the test validated everything he had been told since childhood. He was Charles's son, the rightful heir, the one destined to inherit the crown. The monarchy depends on legitimacy, and William's was intact. But in another sense, that confirmation came with an unbearable weight, because while his future remained secured, his brother's world had just collapsed. The moment William saw the results, he must have felt the surge of relief. Relief that he was who the world believed he was. But relief is rarely pure. It comes tainted with guilt, especially when that same piece of paper delivered devastation to the person you love most. How can you celebrate security when your brother's identity is stripped away in the very same breath? Think about it. William and Harry weren't just brothers. They were partners in survival. They grew up under the suffocating spotlight of the palace, endured the cold formality of royal life, and most tragically, walked together behind their mother's coffin, the world watching their every step. Their shared grief bound them closer than any crown or title ever could. And now, this revelation threatened to unravel even that bond. For William, the confirmation wasn't just about DNA. It was about duty. For decades, he had been told he was the one. His childhood was structured around that destiny. Training, grooming, constant reminders of responsibility. Harry, meanwhile, was the spare, the safety net, the one with a little more freedom. That difference had always defined them. But now, that difference was transformed into something deeper, something sharper: blood. Imagine the conversation William must have had in private with himself. I'm safe. I belong. But what about him? What about my brother? The guilt of survival, the guilt of legitimacy, two things no crown can ease. And then comes the irony. For years, Harry had been the one envied by many for his freedom. He wasn't chained to the throne the way William was. He could live with more independence, more humanity. But this revelation turned that freedom into exile. If William was the heir, Harry was now the outsider, not just by tradition, but by biology. Picture William in those first hours after the results. Maybe he was in a quiet office, the test in front of him, the words blurring on the page. Maybe his advisors reassured him, whispered that this was good news for the monarchy. But was it good news for William? Because what good is being the heir if it means watching your brother's soul shatter? And what about Kate? She, too, must have seen the implications immediately. Her husband's future was secure, yes, but what about the family drama that would now engulf them? Kate has always been seen as the steady hand, the peacemaker. Did she urge William to comfort Harry, to remind him that love matters more than DNA? Or did she recognize that the palace's survival depended on William distancing himself from Harry, no matter how much it hurt? Here's the haunting truth. William's confirmation didn't heal the monarchy. It fractured it further. Because by confirming one son, the test condemned the other. And in a family already plagued by division, that fracture widened into a canyon. Now let's talk about the emotional toll. William has always been described as more reserved than Harry, less likely to show his feelings. But those who know him say he feels deeply, often more than he lets on. In private, those tears came. Not the tears of relief, but the tears of loss. The realization that his brother, his companion in grief, his fellow soldier in the war against the press, was no longer his brother in the way he thought he was. Imagine him looking back at childhood photos. Christmas mornings, summer holidays, Diana's hugs. All those moments were still real, but they were reframed. The bond wasn't about shared bloodlines, but about shared love. And while that sounds poetic, it also sounds fragile. Because bloodlines are what the monarchy lives and dies on. Now let me ask you this. If you were William, what would you say to Harry? How do you look him in the eye and say, "Yes, I am Charles's son, and you are not"? Do you comfort him? Do you ignore the truth and cling to the love you shared? Or do you distance yourself, not out of malice, but out of the unbearable discomfort of holding what he's lost? William's confirmation was more than just a scientific result. It was a cruel mirror, reflecting the divide between the brothers. It didn't make him feel stronger, it made him feel lonelier. Because what good is the crown if it comes at the cost of the person you love most? But here's the twist. The palace saw William's confirmation as a victory, a chance to stabilize the narrative, a way to prove that the heir was intact, that the monarchy's future was safe. In their cold, calculating eyes, William's DNA was the firewall protecting the throne from scandal. But what they didn't realize was that in protecting William, they destroyed Harry. And by destroying Harry, they risked tearing apart the very family image they were so desperate to preserve. Because Harry's test wasn't just different, it was damning. And once the truth of his DNA was revealed, there would be no turning back. And so, William sat with the knowledge of his legitimacy, even as he prepared to face the devastating truth of his brother's illegitimacy. The results had confirmed him, but Harry's results would condemn them both. And what came next would not only shake Harry's life, it would shake the monarchy to its very core. What if the man you called Dad your entire life wasn't your father at all? What if the foundation of your identity, your place in your family, your place in history, was ripped away in a single, clinical revelation? That's the torment Prince Harry faced when the DNA results came back. William's test had confirmed what everyone already knew. He was Charles's son, the heir, the embodiment of the Windsor line. But Harry's results? They told a different story, a story that detonated everything he thought he knew about himself. The paper didn't lie. The DNA was conclusive. Harry's genetic code did not match Charles's. His bloodline diverged entirely, linking him not to the House of Windsor, but to another man altogether. But here's the part that burns. Who was that man? That's where speculation, suspicion, and decades of rumor collided into an emotional wrecking ball. The first and most obvious name to emerge was James Hewitt, the former cavalry officer, Diana's well-known lover. The resemblance between Harry and Hewitt had been tabloid fodder for decades. Ginger hair, similar features, the same mischievous grin. For years, the palace denied it. For years, loyalists insisted the timeline proved it impossible. Diana didn't meet Hewitt until after Harry was born. But DNA doesn't care about timelines. DNA doesn't bend to palace denials. And when Harry's results came back, many whispered, "It's him. It has to be him." But what if it wasn't? That's the twist. DNA confirmed Charles wasn't the father, but it didn't neatly write Hewitt's name in black and white. The truth was far murkier. The lab results pointed to a match outside the Windsor line. Yes, but the exact man wasn't explicitly revealed in the documents that leaked. Which means Harry's father could have been Hewitt, or someone else entirely. A shadowy figure in Diana's life the public never knew. A lover protected by silence, buried by history, erased by the palace machine. Now pause and think about this. How does a son process that? Harry had spent his entire life haunted by comparisons to Hewitt. He joked about it publicly, but in private, those jokes must have cut deep. Imagine the torment, mocked for decades about something you didn't control, only to find out that the mockery was rooted in truth. The world had been laughing at his identity, and suddenly, the joke was no longer funny. It was devastating. Picture Harry sitting with those results in his hands. Meghan nearby, perhaps reaching for him, perhaps stunned into silence herself. For Harry, it wasn't just about discovering who his father was. It was about losing the father he thought he had. Charles may not have been the most affectionate man, but he was still Harry's dad. The man who raised him, who shared family dinners, who scolded him, who gave him his surname, his titles, his position in life. And now all of that was gone, replaced by a void. This is where the emotional chaos begins. Who do you become when your very name feels like a lie? Prince Harry of Wales suddenly sounded hollow. The Windsor crest, the HRH, the Duke of Sussex, all those titles tied to a bloodline that wasn't his. For a man already at odds with the institution, this revelation was gasoline on the fire. But let's dig into the psychology here. Harry's rebellion, his desire to escape the monarchy, to live outside the rigid system, suddenly made sense in a new, twisted way. Was his discomfort with the crown rooted not just in personality, but in biology? Was there always a part of him that didn't fit because, deep down, he didn't belong? And what about William? Imagine his reaction when the results were revealed. Relief for himself, yes. But then the gut punch of hearing his brother's truth. The man who had been his equal in grief, his comrade in suffering, was suddenly different. William's tears weren't for himself, they were for Harry. For the brother who was now half a brother, bound only by Diana's blood and nothing more. Let's not forget Diana in all of this. The results, in a way, dragged her ghost back into the spotlight. If Harry wasn't Charles's son, then Diana had carried a secret she never shared publicly. A secret that now, decades after her death, had come roaring back to life. Did she leave clues? Did she confide in anyone? Was this her act of rebellion against a loveless marriage, or a desperate search for the affection she was denied? The palace's reaction, as always, was cold calculation. They knew immediately what this meant. It wasn't just scandal, it was dynamite under the monarchy's foundations. The institution is built on bloodlines. If one of the most famous princes in the world wasn't truly royal by blood, what did that mean for his children? Archie and Lilibet. What of their titles, their claims, their future? Would they be considered Windsor blood or outsiders? But beyond the politics was the personal. For Harry, the revelation was not just a headline. It was a heartbreak. He was no longer Charles's son. And if he wasn't Charles's son, then what was he? Who was he? A question no man wants to face in his late 30s, after decades of public life. Now let me ask you directly, what would you do in his place? Would you want to meet the man who truly fathered you? Would you demand answers? Or would you cling to the father who raised you, blood or no blood? Because that's the tragedy here. Harry wasn't just given an answer, he was given a choice. A choice between clinging to the past or rewriting his future. And yet, the most chilling part wasn't Harry's tears. It was the silence that followed. The palace moved quickly, trying to bury the results, to silence the leaks, to contain the damage. But the truth was already out. The whispers had turned into headlines, the speculation into confirmation. Harry was no longer Prince Harry, son of Charles. He was Harry, son of Diana, and someone else. But whose son was he? That question lingered like a ghost, unanswered, unresolved, haunting every headline, every conversation, every family dinner that followed. And that's where the story digs deeper. Because if Diana left behind any clue, any confession, any letter, then the truth about Harry's real father might not be lost after all. But what Diana wrote in one particular letter would not only shock the brothers, it would unravel everything the palace had fought to protect. And no one saw it coming. What if the truth wasn't buried in DNA alone, but in words Diana herself left behind? What if she, long before her death, knew the very secret now haunting her sons, and tried, in her own way, to preserve it, protect it, or one day reveal it? That's the chilling possibility surrounding what many insiders now whisper about, Diana's hidden confession. For years, we've heard that Diana was a woman of secrets. She lived in a palace of whispers, forced to play the role of dutiful princess while enduring emotional neglect, betrayal, and relentless public scrutiny. And like anyone trapped in a gilded cage, she sought release, not always in the arms of her husband, but in the solace of others who made her feel seen. Her infamous Panorama interview in 1995 was the most public act of defiance, where she admitted to infidelity, pain, and isolation. But what about what she never said on camera? What about what she wrote in private, in diaries and letters meant only for those she trusted? Some of those letters have surfaced before. They've been auctioned, leaked, whispered about by so-called friends and confidants. Diana poured her soul into words. She wrote about her despair, her longing for love, her dreams for her sons. But among those letters, there are rumors of one that stands apart. A letter not meant for public eyes. A letter where Diana, in a moment of vulnerability, allegedly confessed what so many suspected, that Harry may not have been Charles's son. Imagine her voice, fragile but resolute, writing late at night by the dim glow of a desk lamp. Alone in Kensington Palace, the corridors echoing with silence, she may have poured her truth onto the page. Did she name a man? Did she confess guilt, fear, or relief? Or was it more cryptic? Hints, innuendos, clues that only now, in light of DNA results, take on devastating meaning? Here's the twist. If such a letter exists, it would be both a confession and a cry for understanding. Diana wasn't malicious. She loved her boys with a depth that defied royal coldness. Everything she did was for them. So if she admitted Harry's paternity in writing, it wasn't to shame him. It was to leave him a piece of herself, something to help him understand one day who he truly was. Now, ask yourself, why haven't we seen this letter publicly? Because the palace, if they ever laid hands on it, would have buried it deep. Nothing threatens the monarchy more than Diana's voice, even from beyond the grave. Her words had the power to dismantle illusions, to sway the public, to make people feel her pain as their own. If she left behind a written confession about Harry's father, it would not just be a scandal, it would be a nuclear bomb under the House of Windsor. Consider this. In the years after Diana's death, her belongings were carefully catalogued, sealed, and in many cases, hidden. Even William and Harry did not immediately gain full access to everything she left behind. What if among her belongings sat a sealed envelope, a letter never meant for palace eyes, but for her sons when they were ready? Could it be that someone close to her, a trusted friend, a confidant, protected it all these years, waiting for the right moment? And if that moment has come, why now? Why release whispers of its existence just as DNA confirmation surfaces? Coincidence? Or was this orchestrated, a two-pronged strike against the royal machine? Science on one side, Diana's words on the other? Picture Harry reading such a letter. He's already reeling from DNA results, his world shattered. Then he sees his mother's handwriting, her familiar curves on the page, confessing in her own words that yes, he is loved beyond measure, but no, he is not Charles's son. The devastation would be unbearable, and yet, strangely, there would also be relief. Relief that the one person he trusted above all had not left him entirely in the dark. Relief that Diana, even in death, reached out to him with honesty when everyone else surrounded him with lies. And what about William? For him, the letter would cut differently. He adored his mother, but her confession would complicate his entire relationship with Harry. Brothers by blood? No, only half-brothers. Brothers by love? Yes, but love doesn't always survive under the weight of secrets. Imagine William's pain, having to accept that the bond he thought was whole was fractured all along, and that his mother had chosen silence rather than prepare him for the truth. But let's step back and ask a deeper question. Why didn't Diana ever say it openly? If she knew, why didn't she speak during her Panorama interview, her greatest act of rebellion? The answer may be simple, because she loved Harry too much to expose him while he was a child. She knew the cruelty of the media, the viciousness of the tabloids. To admit Harry's paternity while he was young would have destroyed him. Better to protect him, even if it meant burying the truth until he was old enough to face it himself. And yet, her silence became the palace's greatest weapon. For years, they leaned on it. If Diana didn't say it, it can't be true. That's how they brushed aside rumors, how they gaslit the public, how they dismissed Harry's torment. But if Diana's hidden confession now comes to light, all those years of denial collapse in an instant. Now imagine the effect on the monarchy's image. Diana, the people's princess, confirming in her own words that Harry was not Charles's son? It would destroy the Windsor myth of unity. It would prove that even at its most vulnerable point, the institution was built on lies. And here's the most chilling possibility. What if that letter is already in Harry's possession? What if, alongside the DNA results, he now holds his mother's words in his hands? It would mean he isn't just facing a new truth. He's facing the fact that his mother lived with this secret, carried it alone, and left it to him as a final inheritance. So the question isn't just whether the confession exists. The question is whether Harry is ready to reveal it. And if he does, the world won't just see DNA results. They'll hear Diana's voice echoing from the grave, shattering the palace's walls in a way no living critic ever could. But the emotional storm doesn't end there. Because after Diana's whispered confession, Harry's pain turned into something rawer, darker, and far more dangerous. And when the breakdown finally came, it wasn't just a moment of sadness. It was a collapse that shook the foundations of the family he once thought was his own. What happens when the truth you feared your entire life finally stares back at you in black and white? What happens when the whispers, the cruel jokes, the tabloid headlines, the late-night talk show punchlines, all of it, suddenly become reality? That's the abyss Harry fell into when the DNA results and Diana's hidden confession converged. For years, Harry had lived with ridicule. The spare, the rebel prince. The one who doesn't look like Charles. He laughed it off sometimes. He ignored it at others. But deep down, there must have always been that gnawing fear. What if it was true? And then one day, the fear crystallized into fact. He was not Charles's son. The breakdown began quietly. Not in front of cameras. Not in front of the world. In private. In the stillness of a California night, far from Buckingham Palace, far from the gilded halls of Windsor Castle, Harry collapsed under the weight of his own unraveling identity. Imagine it. A man in his late 30s, a husband, a father, a veteran, a prince by title, all of it suddenly stripped bare. Who was he now? Was he still a prince? Was he still royal? Or was he simply Harry, a man without the lineage that defined his entire life? The pain must have been unbearable. Reports from those close to him suggest he lashed out in anger one moment and dissolved into tears the next. Rage, grief, betrayal. They collided inside him like storm waves crashing against cliffs. He felt abandoned by the father who raised him, haunted by the mother who had hidden the truth, and exposed to a world that never wanted to let him just be himself. And what of Meghan? Her role in this moment was crucial. Was she the anchor who held him steady, reminding him that family is more than blood? Or was she shaken too, realizing that the husband she had married was now carrying a secret even larger than the monarchy itself? Perhaps she whispered reassurances. You are still Harry. You are still a father, a husband, a son to the only parent who truly loved you, Diana. But could her words soothe the kind of wound that splits a man's very soul? Now think of this. Harry had spent years accusing the palace of cruelty, manipulation, and lies. He left the UK with Meghan, determined to break free. And now, this revelation vindicated him in a twisted way. He had been right all along. He never truly belonged. But vindication doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings despair, because the freedom he longed for came wrapped in the agony of betrayal. Imagine the images in his mind as the breakdown took hold. Walking behind Diana's coffin with William. Was he even truly walking as a Windsor that day? Receiving medals in uniform. Was he wearing them as an imposter? Smiling for official portraits. Was every smile a mask hiding a lie? Each memory, once a point of pride or sorrow, now reframed through the brutal lens of illegitimacy. And then, the crushing guilt. Not guilt for himself, but for his children. Archie and Lilibet. What did this mean for them? Were they royal? Or weren't they? Did they inherit a place in the Windsor line? Or were they cut adrift by the same revelation that now consumed him? Harry had left the UK hoping to give his children freedom, a normal life away from royal expectations. But this truth didn't just free them. It cast them into limbo, neither fully royal nor fully removed. And here's the part that pierces most deeply. Harry's breakdown wasn't only about blood. It was about love. Charles had raised him. Flawed, distant, imperfect, yes. But he was still dad. And now Harry was forced to reckon with the fact that the man he had argued with, rebelled against, and occasionally sought approval from, was never truly his father. It's one thing to hate your father. It's another to realize you never had one at all. Did he pick up the phone? Did he call William in a desperate need to connect, to hear his brother's voice, to anchor himself in the only family tie he still knew to be real? Or did he retreat further, too ashamed, too broken, too raw to face the man whose DNA had spared him from this torment? For William, watching from afar, the breakdown must have been a nightmare. His own legitimacy was secure, but his brother's identity was dissolving before his eyes. He wanted to protect Harry, but how do you protect someone from the truth? The two men who had once leaned on each other through Diana's death were now split by Diana's secret. Let's ask the hardest question. Did Harry feel betrayed by Diana? For years, she had been his protector, his angel, the one who showed him love when the palace withheld it. But now he must have asked himself, why didn't she tell me? Why did she let me grow up believing a lie? The anger must have been volcanic. Anger at the palace for exploiting him, anger at Charles for raising him under false pretenses, and anger even at Diana for leaving him with this burden long after she was gone. And then the tears came. Reports suggest Harry broke down in a way that shocked even those closest to him. This wasn't the carefully composed grief of a prince. This was raw, messy, uncontrollable sobbing. The kind of tears that come not just from sadness, but from the collapse of an entire identity. Would you blame him? How would you react if, At nearly 40 years old, you were told your life had been a fiction. Would you scream? Would you collapse? Or would you retreat into silence, unable to process the enormity of it all? For Harry, there was no escaping the breakdown. It was inevitable. The palace may have hoped to bury the DNA results, but truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. And once it did, Harry could no longer run from the one thing he had always feared most, that he was the outsider, the imposter, the son of Diana but not the son of Charles. But the palace wasn't done with him yet, because while Harry was breaking down in California, behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, William was having his own reckoning. And the moment came when the heir, the confirmed son, could no longer hide his emotions either, because William's silent tears were about to flow. Picture this: William alone in a room, the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders, the test results still echoing in his mind. He has the confirmation, the validation every heir dreams of. Charles is his father, the bloodline is intact, his destiny as king remains unshaken. And yet, instead of triumph, instead of relief, he breaks. Silent, suffocating tears. Because what good is being the heir if the price is watching your brother's soul collapse? This was the cruel irony of the DNA revelation. William's future was secured, but his bond with Harry was fractured in a way no palace strategist, no royal advisor, could mend. For decades, they were united in grief. Two boys who walked behind their mother's coffin, two men who bore the scars of a childhood lived in the unforgiving glare of the public eye. That bond had always been their anchor. But now it was cracked. Because the one thing they always clung to, the certainty of being Diana's sons together, was no longer enough. Imagine William holding that knowledge. He looks at old photos of the two of them as children, laughing at the piano with Diana, playing football in the garden, grinning on holiday. Memories soaked in innocence. They were just boys then. They didn't know about crowns, about succession, about scandals. They only knew they had each other. Now William was forced to see those memories differently, not as two Windsor princes, but as a future king and his half-brother, divided by blood. But William isn't the type to show pain publicly. He's stoic, restrained, a man conditioned by duty to hide emotion. So when the tears came, they came in solitude. Silent, gut-wrenching tears shed not in weakness, but in mourning. Mourning the loss of a bond that had already been strained by Meghan, by the rift, by the departure to California, and now by something far deeper, DNA. And let's not forget the pressure from the palace. Advisors would have whispered reassurance into William's ear. This proves your legitimacy. This strengthens the monarchy. The public will rally behind you. They saw the test as a weapon, a shield to protect the institution. But William didn't see numbers and charts. He saw Harry. He saw the man who shared his pain, his joy, his secrets, his jokes. And now, that man was spiraling, broken, because of the very truth that secured William's destiny. It must have felt like betrayal, even though it wasn't his fault. Survivor's guilt. William was confirmed, Harry condemned. For the first time, William must have wondered if being heir was worth it. Because how do you carry the crown when your brother is crushed beneath it? And what about Kate? She, too, must have witnessed William's silent torment. She knows him better than anyone, knows the way he hides his emotions behind carefully measured words and a practiced smile. Did she comfort him? Did she remind him that Harry would always be his brother, no matter what the test said? Or did she see what William himself feared, that the bond was irreparably damaged, that nothing could make them whole again? This is where the story turns painfully human. Strip away the titles, the crowns, the palaces, and what are they? Two men who lost their mother too soon. Two brothers who promised to protect each other against a world that didn't understand them. And yet, here they were, ripped apart not by choice, not by rivalry, but by truth itself. William's silent tears weren't just for Harry. They were for Diana, for the life she dreamed of giving them, for the unity she wanted them to share. She had fought to raise them as equals, to shield them from the palace machine. And now, from beyond the grave, her own secret had undone that unity. Her love wasn't enough to protect them from the truth. But here's the haunting thought. William must have asked himself, did my mother know I would end up here? Did she foresee this moment? Did she ever imagine I would be forced to carry not only the burden of the crown, but the guilt of surviving a test that destroyed my brother? Let me ask you, the audience, if you were William, would you tell Harry that none of it mattered, that blood doesn't define love? Or would you stay silent, knowing that words cannot mend wounds this deep? Silence was easier, perhaps, and yet silence is what allows wounds to fester. The truth is, William's tears marked a turning point. Up until now, he had been the strong one, the steady one, the rock. But this revelation cracked even him. It proved that beneath the polished image of the future king lies a man drowning in guilt and grief. And while William was shedding silent tears in London, Harry was breaking down in California. Two brothers, oceans apart, weeping for the same truth, but unable to comfort each other. And that was exactly what the palace feared most. Because if the brothers couldn't unite, then the monarchy itself couldn't hold. But the palace didn't just fear the tears. They feared what would come next, the storm of panic, damage control, and frantic cover-ups. Because once the truth started leaking out, it wasn't just a family crisis anymore. It was a royal crisis. And behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, panic was about to erupt. Panic. That's the only word that can describe what unfolded behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace once whispers of the DNA results began to ripple through the institution. The monarchy thrives on order, image, and control, but this revelation threatened all three at once. For years, they had buried the rumors, dismissed them as tabloid nonsense, silenced anyone who dared suggest otherwise. But now, they weren't dealing with gossip. They were dealing with proof. And proof is something no spin doctor, no press secretary, no palace insider can erase. Imagine the scene. Advisors huddled in dimly lit rooms, voices hushed but urgent, phones buzzing, papers shuffled, contingency plans dusted off from the darkest corners of the filing cabinet. Every leak, every whisper of scandal is treated like a national security breach in the monarchy, but this was worse. This wasn't a scandal of behavior. This was a scandal of blood. And in a monarchy built entirely on bloodlines, that's not a crack in the wall. It's a wrecking ball smashing through the foundation. First came the immediate questions. How many people knew? Was the test legitimate? Could it be discredited? Could the results be contained before they reached the public? Advisors scrambled to assess damage control. One faction argued for denial. Release a statement discrediting the false results, smear the sources, and let the media chew on the idea that it was just another conspiracy. Another faction pushed for silence. Ignore it, let it die down, never dignify it with a response. But a smaller, more dangerous faction whispered, what if it leaks anyway? What if silence looks like guilt? And then there was Charles. How did the king react? Cold, furious, betrayed, or broken? He had always been plagued by whispers of infidelity, of Diana's affairs, of the Hewitt rumor. He had tried to endure it with dignity, burying it beneath his marriage to Camilla, his years of waiting for the throne. But this was different. This wasn't rumor anymore. This was confirmation. And it struck him where it hurt most, not as king, but as a father. Imagine Charles's rage. At Diana, for humiliating him even from beyond the grave. At Harry, for daring to exist as the embodiment of that betrayal. At the advisors who failed to contain the storm. And perhaps even at himself, for allowing his marriage to crumble so spectacularly that this was even possible. For Charles, the monarchy had always been about legacy. His entire life was a waiting game for the crown. But now his legacy was tainted. Not because of William, his heir was intact, but because of Harry, the son he raised as his own who was never truly his. Now picture Camilla. For decades, she was the scapegoat, the other woman, the symbol of everything Diana was not. The public blamed her for Diana's misery, for the collapse of Charles's marriage. And now, suddenly, Diana's secret cast Camilla in a different light. Could Camilla, of all people, be vindicated? Could she finally point to the truth and say, see, Diana betrayed Charles too? You can almost hear the bitterness in her voice, the twisted satisfaction of seeing the halo around Diana dimmed by revelation. But Camilla also knew better than anyone. This wasn't a victory. Because the public's love for Diana was eternal, and any attempt to weaponize this truth against her would backfire catastrophically. Inside the palace, strategies were being drawn up like battle plans. How to manage the press. How to manage William and Harry themselves. Advisors debated whether the brothers should issue a joint statement. Some said yes, it would show unity, even in crisis. Others argued no, the less Harry spoke, the better. After all, Harry was unpredictable, emotional, a loose cannon. If he spoke publicly, he could take down the entire monarchy with one interview. And here's the thing. Harry didn't want to play their game anymore. He had already left the UK. He had already built a new life in California, away from the palace machine. But this revelation pulled him back into their orbit whether he wanted it or not. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about the institution. And institutions fight like cornered beasts when threatened. Think of William in this storm. Advisors must have pressed him to be the steady one, the strong one, the face of continuity. Your DNA is intact, they reminded him. You are safe. But William didn't feel safe. He felt torn. Torn between duty to the crown and love for his brother. And for once, those two forces weren't aligned. They were at war. The panic spread outward. Every royal relative, every distant cousin, every aristocrat tied to the Windsors by blood or marriage was suddenly buzzing with speculation. Could this revelation topple everything? Was Harry still a prince? What would happen to his children? Would titles be stripped? Would the line of succession be clarified in cold, legal terms, writing Harry out of history altogether? And then came the leak. Because no matter how tightly the palace tried to control the narrative, secrets this explosive never stay sealed. Someone, whether out of spite, revenge, or principle, let the truth seep out. A journalist with the right connections. A friend of Diana's who had guarded the secret too long. A palace insider who could no longer stomach the lies. And once it was out, the palace's panic turned into desperation. Front pages screamed the headlines. Not Charles's son. Harry's DNA shock. Brothers by love, not blood. Television anchors speculated endlessly. Social media exploded. And the monarchy's image, already bruised by scandal after scandal, took another brutal hit. Ask yourself this. If the monarchy survives on mystique, what happens when the mystique is shattered? If the crown is built on bloodlines, what happens when one of the bloodlines is proven false? Panic wasn't just about Harry. Panic was about survival. And survival, in the world of royalty, means sacrifice. Someone had to take the fall. Someone had to become the lightning rod, the scapegoat, the villain in the narrative. Would it be Harry, painted as the ungrateful outsider, the illegitimate rebel who betrayed the crown? Or would it be Diana, her reputation posthumously tarnished to protect the throne? This was the palace's greatest fear, that no matter who they sacrificed, the truth itself could not be undone. And while advisors scrambled, while Charles fumed, while William wept in silence, Harry was preparing for his next move. He had broken down, yes. But from the ashes of breakdown comes something even more dangerous, resolve. Because Harry wasn't just going to sit quietly while the palace panicked. He was about to find his voice. And when the truth finally leaked to the world, it wasn't just whispers anymore. It was a global explosion. It started as a whisper, a quiet rumor floating through corridors, murmured between journalists, hinted at in cryptic headlines. But then, like a spark hitting dry tinder, the whisper became a roar. The DNA truth wasn't contained, it wasn't buried, it wasn't silenced. It was leaked, and once it hit daylight, it spread with the ferocity of a wildfire. The world woke up to headlines that read like fiction, not Charles's son. DNA bombshell rocks royals. William and Harry, half-brothers exposed. Within hours, television networks cut their programming, commentators filled panels, and social media was ablaze. In the blink of an eye, a family secret that was meant to remain buried had become the biggest story on Earth. But how did it happen? Who dared to break the wall of silence the palace had built so carefully around this truth? There are competing theories. Some believe it was a palace insider, disgusted by decades of lies, who slipped the results to a trusted journalist. Others say it came from Diana's old circle, a loyal friend who believed the world had a right to know that Harry deserved vindication after years of being mocked. And then, there's the most tantalizing theory of all, that Harry himself orchestrated the leak. Not out of spite, but out of desperation. Imagine him, broken by the truth, deciding that if his life was going to collapse, he would at least control the moment it fell apart. Regardless of the source, the effect was the same. The world was stunned. For millions, Harry had always been the rebel prince, the cheeky spare, the boy who gave the monarchy a human face. Now he was something else entirely. The outsider, the son of Diana but not of Charles, the living embodiment of the scandal that haunted the Windsors for decades. Think about the shockwaves. People who had mocked the rumors for years suddenly realized they were true. Those who had defended Harry against tabloid cruelty now saw him in a different light, not as the victim of gossip, but as the victim of a lie so enormous it shattered his identity. And for the monarchy, the consequences were catastrophic. Because this wasn't just about Harry. This was about the crown itself. The monarchy's power rests on bloodlines. Every title, every privilege, every ounce of legitimacy is tied to who you're descended from. And if Harry wasn't Charles's son, what did that mean for Archie and Lilibet? Were they royal or not? Did they have a place in history, or were they cut off from the Windsor line altogether? The questions exploded online, debated in comment sections, dissected on talk shows. The palace couldn't issue a statement fast enough to catch up with the tidal wave of speculation. And then came the images. News networks ran split screens. Photos of Harry next to Charles. Photos of Harry next to James Hewitt.